Hi class, and welcome to this video on Year 12 Economics, which is going to discuss the concept of a competitive market, a perfectly competitive market. This is our second video in Unit 3 Outcome 1, and I hope by the end of this video you can say that you understand the nature of and the conditions for a perfectly competitive market. Now we're splitting these videos up into key knowledge points, and as you can see that this is the second key knowledge point of Unit 3 Outcome 1. So you can start to work out which ones you need to watch by these key knowledge points. For this, we're going to need to have a quick little think about what we mean by microeconomics and what we mean by a market, two key principles in economics. We know that most economic courses are divided into microeconomics and macroeconomics. And Unit 3 Outcome 1 is all about microeconomics. This is the study of individual consumers and businesses that make up the economy. So we're thinking about how individual consumers and business operate in the giant economy of Australia, essentially. Now this focuses on the role of what we call a market and how this market impacts what we call the price mechanism, which is essentially the price of goods and services, and the concept of supply and demand, which are our next topics that we're going to cover. So what is a market? Now you might think of a market when I ask you that, you kind of potentially think about images like this. Shops everywhere, people selling their goods and services. And it's not far off. A market is an arrangement that exists that facilitates exchanges to occur between buyers and sellers. So that's the technical definition, and you can see there are some terms there that I've bolded and now underlined. Exchanges, so exchanges of goods and services between buyers, people who are trying to purchase goods and services, and sellers that produce them. Now, the buyer might be households, so us. It could be businesses buying goods and services to maybe use in their production, governments, and other groups, maybe, for example, not-for-profit. When we are talking about sellers, we typically talk about businesses. Now, even though we might think about a physical space like a market, this is anywhere where an exchange might occur. So it could be a physical space or online. So for example, something like eBay is just as much a market as the physical farmers market, for example, where farmers sell their goods and services. What we understand in economics is we consider the market to be the main instrument for where we allocate scarce resources. Because remembering, we have the problem of relative scarcity, where our needs and wants are greater than the resources. So we have not enough resources to meet everyone's needs and wants, so it makes sense that we create arrangements, markets, where we allow people to exchange goods and services in the most efficient way, so people's needs are met. This allows us to answer really important questions around what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So what do we mean by the perfectly competitive market? Economists have developed theories about consumer and producer behavior, so how we buy and sell goods, by studying what we call simplified markets. We consider this to be supply and demand analysis, which is coming later. But to do this analysis, we base this on the concept of markets being highly or perfectly competitive, or the most optimal or best, I'm going to call it optimal, but it's really the best situation we can have where buyers and sellers interact. A perfectly competitive market, this is your definition, occurs when all economics agents are price takers and no individual buyer or seller has the market power to influence prices. That's quite complicated. So let's break that down. It occurs when all economic agents, these are just all essentially buyer and sellers. So everyone who wants to purchase goods and services are price takers. This means that no one can influence the price significantly. This is because no individual buyer or seller has so much power that they get to influence what is happening by too much. There's not a bully in the market that gets to make decisions that impact others unfairly. Now, there are certain conditions and assumptions that must occur for a market to be perfectly competitive, or, as we talked about before, to be the best possible market we can have. What are these conditions? For there to be a perfectly competitive market, we must have a number of conditions that occur. We must have many buyers. So many people that demand or consume goods. So not one person or individual that is buying all the things, because then they would have too much power. There must be many sellers, many suppliers and producers, because then not one seller has all the power. And therefore, because we have many buyers, they will all be price takers. Therefore, the price is set by the market, not one individual person. Think about if you go into the supermarket, you are a price taker because you don't get to negotiate the price. You see the price and you just accept it. There must be homogeneous goods being sold, so then all the products sold are identical. This means there are many sellers selling the same thing, so there isn't one individual seller that sells something unique that then gets to have lots of power. Now, to have many sellers, there must be little or no barriers to entry or exit the market. We're not protecting individual sellers. You can come and go as you please as buyers or sellers, hence many of them not individuals with lots of power. And there's not limited government intervention that influences the price. Now, if we have those conditions and we have a certain number of assumptions, so with things that we assume, then we have a perfectly competitive market. We are making the assumption that all participants are price takers. All the buyers and sellers or economic agents are going to act rationally. So they're trying to maximize satisfaction and maximize profit. And probably the most important assumption, there is perfect market knowledge. Buyers and sellers have full information. Everyone knows and everything that is going on, so we can act rationally. It's all about creating a marketplace or facility of exchange where buyers and sellers are equal, and hence we have a perfect competitive market. So these are important things to remember. Now, how does this make an efficient and good economy? An economy based on the perfectly competitive market will mean that we have the lowest possible prices, and we will have production of goods that meet consumers' needs and wants. Now, that seems two important things that we want, and that's why we want it. We want to have products that have the lowest possible price, that are being produced, that maximize needs and wants. Because if consumers' needs and wants are being met at the lowest possible price, that is a good thing for the economy. This will mean that consumers can access the maximum amount of goods and services, and this results in high allocative and technical efficiency, something we'll go through later. The lack of government intervention means intertemporal efficiency may not be achieved. And these are things that we will go through in a specific video on efficiency, which you are welcome to look at after if you'd like. What do we mean by the price mechanism or market mechanism, which I'll talk about in future videos? This describes how in a perfectly competitive market, the forces of demand and supply will determine the price of goods. And that's what we want in a competitive market. Not individuals with too much power, just the forces of demand and supply working out the price of goods. This will ultimately determine how resources are allocated, and in this perfect market, we don't need much government intervention because it's all happening perfectly. Now, Australia uses this perfectly competitive market model as much as possible. Australia is trying to create a situation where our markets are perfectly competitive. This is because it maximizes the allocation of resources, and the price mechanism or market mechanism plays the biggest role in it. Now, many factors will influence what the price ultimately is determined in the market, and this is all about demand and supply, which is our next topic. Now, I hope that has covered what you really need to know on the perfect market. But let's stop, because what I'm going to continue on for a couple of minutes is something that's not necessarily on the study design, but is interesting because, of course, not all markets are perfectly competitive. But if you want to stop there, I hope that this video has helped you understand the nature and conditions and assumptions of the perfect competitive market, something that we are trying to achieve. And if we do, we theoretically will have the most efficient and best way of allocating our resources. Now, the market structure is a way economists look at how industries are organized. Now, the structure of a market we are hoping is going to be perfectly competitive. But not all of them are. Some are not perfect because market structures are influenced by the number of firms that actually exist and their market share, the product's degree of homogeneity, so whether it is identical or differentiated, the ease in which new firms can enter and exit the market, and the way that firms compete. Because you might remember the conditions that we needed. We need lots of buyers and sellers, homogeneous products, buyers and sellers being able to enter and leave the market, and all of them being price takers. Now, if those things don't occur, we have other market structures which aren't perfectly competitive. Someone will have too much power. Now, the types of market structures we can have is perfect competition, one that we've talked about. But these three, monopolistic, oligopolies, and monopolies, are what we could say are not perfectly competitive. And these do exist in economies, and they do exist in Australia. So we need to understand them sometimes, because you might see where a market is not working effectively. It might be because of one of these structures. A market structure for a perfect market is when these things exist. And I'm going to just not go through this because we've done this in a previous slide. You're welcome to pause the video. These are the conditions and assumptions of a perfectly competitive market. A monopolistic market is an industry that is highly competitive. So there's lots of buyers and sellers. So let's go. Lots of buyers, sellers. So that is a requirement of a perfect competitive market. But the products that they are selling are not homogeneous. That is, the products are differentiated typically by brand. So we have lots of things similar to perfect competition, high numbers of buyers and sellers who are well informed, entry and exit with little or no restrictions. But some businesses in this market have higher market power than others because they are making their product appear different. And this might be through branding or advertising. So examples like this include mechanics, hairdressers, clothing, and retailers. So if you think about all the brands of clothes you can buy, they are trying to become more powerful than others by having a strong brand. So some of you might see, for example, Levi's as a jeans brand, and you might go, I am prepared to pay more for Levi's jeans because I believe their brand is stronger than others. So it is not perfectly competitive because they're trying to gain advantages from each other. So they are trying to differentiate their product, maybe through the physical characteristic. So the size, color, taste, for example. Fast food chains are trying to create a product that is deemed more desirable. Location, how many outlets they have. The level of service, or maybe just the image, how prestigious their brand is seen. So not necessarily deemed as a undesirable market, but understanding that not everything is perfectly competitive in this, because businesses are trying to get more power than others. An oligopoly, however, is where we start to definitely not have perfectly competitive markets. These are industries where there are a few very large firms, and these dominate the industry in terms of market share. So most buyers have to use these firms, and there is limited competition between them. So this has some issues because decisions made by these firms might be dependent on decisions made by their competitors. They might start to work together a little bit. An example of that in Australia is the banks. There are only 4 major banks in Australia. So they often get together theoretically and make decisions where their interest rates align, and it might not be as low as consumers want. Another example is the Australian supermarket market, where there may be many sellers, so there's lots of people selling fruit and vegetables and lots of different other food, but there is a large number with little or no market power and a few really big players. So who are the big supermarkets in Australia? Coles, Woolworths, you might even chuck Aldi in. Most people buy them from there, and hence they have a lot of power. A monopoly is the least competitive market where there is one sole seller. There is no substitute, and because there is only one seller, they have a strong influence of price. They are what we call a price maker. They determine how much the price is going to be because they are able to determine the supply provided. And we'll go through that a little bit more in our next video. Monopolies exist because there is massive barriers to entry, making it nearly impossible for new firms to enter. This could be, for example, like Telstra owned for a large period of time all the telecommunications in Australia. It might be governments giving exclusive rights to certain businesses to do things, or it could just be the high cost of starting a business, meaning it's only efficient to have one business like Australia Post doing it. And these are what we would call inefficient markets. This is the least efficient one seller having all the power. So to summarize, here is a comparison between the 4. Perfect competition being the one that we are striving for, monopolistic, oligopolies, and monopolies being not perfectly competitive. And you are welcome to pause the video to have a look at a summary here. And in summary, let's recap. The thing that we were really focusing on is perfectly competitive markets and the nature of them. What are they? And the conditions and assumptions that are required to have one. Because if we do have that, then we are going to have a market that is going to have the market mechanism working, where buyers and sellers and their supply and demand of products will result in the price being determined. And that is the most efficient way a market can operate. I hope you've enjoyed and found this video useful. Please watch my other videos. The next ones in order will be on demand and then supply, which link in perfectly to the perfectly competitive market model.